All right, I am going to go ahead then. It's good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and to our esteemed guest speakers. Thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your expertise and insights around this virtual table. I know that I've had the privilege of listening to some really insightful conversations, and I think solution oriented conversations that are building off the back of what the work that Auda NEPAD and this PIDA week is intended to accomplish. So I'm sure this session is going to be no different. We are firmly in the practical phases of how to animate the values and the objectives of PIDA. So our session this afternoon is focusing on mainstreaming PIDA in strategic infrastructure partnerships. My name is Iman Rapeti, and I am delighted to be moderating this session today. Just a couple of rules of engagement. If you want to share some thoughts, we would love to hear your perspective. You can do so in the chat. And if you want to raise your hand and interact with some of our speakers, you're more than welcome to click on the hand raising function. So I think without further ado, in the session, we're going to hear some presentations and then we'll get into a discussion towards the end. So I'm going to invite our first colleague to kick off with the presentation. And this is Robert Lesinge, who is the Chief Executive at Energy, Infrastructure and Services, Private Sector Development and Finance, the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Robert, you have the floor. Please do go ahead.
Thank you so much. I do have a presentation. I understand my colleagues at Auda NEPAD will load the presentation on the screen. But while they are doing so, perhaps I should just have some introductory note. I am really delighted to deliver this presentation today. Delighted because this project has been in the pipeline for the past 2 years, and now we have seen it come to fruition. I think, and you would all agree with me, that Africa has a multitude of partnership agreements with many partners around the world, member states, regional organizations, and most of these partnerships have one thing in common, which is the notion of win-win cooperation. While Africa's partners have generally defined what win means for them in this partnership, the same cannot generally be said for Africa. And this is what pushed us to come up with the idea to develop a common African strategy for mainstreaming PIDA into the continent's partnerships. And in essence, the whole idea is to make PIDA the building block of Africa's strategic infrastructure partnerships. I would want to acknowledge the contribution of the PIDA PAP2 task force in the preparation of this document, particularly the African Union Commission, the African Development Bank, AUD and NEPAD, and the regional economic communities, of course. What I will try to do in this presentation is to give the mandate for coming up with this common position, the rationale for having a common position, what is the content of this document, and most importantly, what is the value addition for having a common African strategy for engaging in infrastructure partnerships. I don't know if I do have my presentation ready now.
Robert, just to let you know, we're trying to get that loaded. So I'm just in conversation with our colleagues, and they're going to make sure that we bring that up for you as quickly and expeditiously as possible. But you're doing a really good job. What we do in television is we buy time. So I think you've done a really good job, because sometimes in television, the answers don't always make sense.
Oh, okay. All right. Maybe I could.
I mean, I think, again, to go back to the focus, and that's why I'm really excited to see your presentation. I've heard you speak in some of the other conversations around, implementation of strategy and so on. So I'm really keen on this one because we've got a mainstream PIDA in the way we engage strategically with partnerships, not only partnerships on the continent. There's been a lot of talk, as you would have heard, about international investors and people asking, well, how do we also get to sit around the table? Does, do the various instruments take things like unsolicited bids and things like that? So it's been quite a vast range of subject matter, and we're very glad to have your expertise.
Yes, thank you, thank you so much. And now I see the presentation on the screen. Let me just say two experiences that pushed us further to prepare this common strategy. I think one in 2018 when there was a FOCAC meeting, and FOCAC is the Forum for African China Cooperation. The 2018 meeting was holding in Beijing, and I do remember that AU and other NEPAD convened a meeting. ECA, the African Development Bank, we were all present in Midrand. We were trying to organize an infrastructure day in Beijing during this FOCAC. And we were scrambling, how do we put together projects that will go and showcase in Beijing. Eventually that Africa Infrastructure Day did not hold, but if we had a common African strategy position, we would be ready to go. Also, last year, I think that there was an important task force, EU Africa Task Force for Infrastructure, Connectivity, Transport, and it was an interesting exercise. But again, if Africa had a common position, it would have been very much easier for the continent to negotiate with these important partners. Next slide, please. Oh, I think that this really is a long version of the presentation. I had just sent another version of the presentation. So perhaps in the interest of time, because I don't envisage that the presentation which I just sent a few minutes ago, which is much more different and summarized, it may take a lot more time. So I would wait for the suggestion of the chair or the moderator. I can speak to the slides that I have in front of me, or the other option would be for the right presentation to be loaded. I'm so sorry for this hitch, but I would go by what the moderator suggests.
And the moderator is waiting for divine intervention. I am chatting, I'm joking, Robert. I am chatting with our colleagues, and hopefully we can get the correct presentation loaded. I wonder if I would have permission then, maybe to bring in one or two of our other speakers, because I know that it's important to you, Robert, to have the correct presentation so that you can deal with the, the high level things that you wanted to share with us. Would you be amenable to that? If I move
Yes, that will be fine with me.
That sounds like the most sensible thing to do. Thanks, Robert, for your forbearance. I really do appreciate it. I think let us move on then to Dr. Tawela Nirenda Jere, who we heard from earlier talking about the implementation phase, Principal Program Officer for the Economic Integration Division for AUDA and NEPAD. I hope, Dr. T, I'm not putting you at a disadvantage by leapfrogging straight to you and your section.
But that I can see the correct presentation right now.
Not really, but I think.
Yeah,
Robert, go ahead.
This is the correct presentation, okay, and I really apologize to everyone for this for this hitch. So can we go to the next slide, please? Yes. Well, what is the mandate, the process, the consultations, and how do we develop and validate this common African position? And I think that this is a valid question that many of us would be asking ourselves. It was in 2018 when the African Union organized the first PIDA dialogue, that the idea of a common African strategy for mainstreaming PIDA into partnership was discussed. And one of the recommendations of that dialogue, and in fact, a content of the communique of that meeting, was that ECA should work with AUC to develop a common position for mainstreaming PIDA into infrastructure partnerships. Then, armed with that mandate, we went to South Africa, Pretoria, where we organized a workshop to start shaping the content of that strategy. And I see that many people in this meeting were actually present in the workshop in Pretoria, where we shaped the skeleton, the outline of that strategic document. I think one of the important things that came out of the Pretoria meeting was the idea of an accountability framework. How are we going to hold Africans and our partners accountable for our partnerships? Now, after coming from Pretoria, there were several other meetings, including a PIDA meeting in Kigali and another one in Malabo in 2019, where we started discussing ideas of this common strategy, including the principles and the key issues that will include in that strategy. And then we went to PIDA Week in Cairo, where we presented the draft strategy. And all along, important suggestions have been made on these documents, which we use to finalize the document, which we presented to the PIDA PAP2 task force, after which we presented to the PIDA steering committee. And finally, we presented this document to the STC, which is the ministers responsible for transport, who have endorsed it. The next step is to go to the heads of state. So you can see the mandate and the process that we have taken so far. Next, please. Well, why do we need a common strategy for infrastructure partnerships? Well, I think the first point is that we do lack a framework, meaning with guiding principles and detailed guidelines to engage with partners on infrastructure development. Of course, all along, we knew that PIDA was a platform to engage with partners, but there was no details or guidelines on how to go about that. Secondly, we do think that there was a need for being proactive, especially in transcontinental infrastructure development partnerships. So we have partnerships with the European Union, with China under the Belt and Road Agreement, and several others, including Arab states, even with Brazil, and so on, and so forth. And to be fair, in many instances, our partners have come better prepared than us. So the need for this strategy was obvious. Again, another point is that there is increasing competition amongst African partners for a share of the continent's infrastructure space and investment. That is common knowledge, and this strategy again will help Africa to better negotiate with its partners. I think a strategy that stresses investment perspectives is really key, rather than from a grant point of view. And finally, the AU do have an overall partnership strategy. It was important that we do have an infrastructure partnership that fits into the overall AU partnership framework. Next, please. This partnership framework, in fact, is encapsulated within the broader vision of infrastructure development in Africa, which is clearly or brilliantly articulated in Agenda 2063 as a continent with world-class integrative infrastructure that crisscrosses the continent. I think this is the picture that we do have when we are engaging with our partners. Now, there are a number of principles that we do believe should guide Africa's engagement with this partnership. One is the general AU principles. Second is the IODA NEPAD development principles. Now, some of our partnerships with countries from the Grand South, so to speak. So the South-South cooperation principles also become important in that regard. Also, the Sustainable Development Goals, which many African countries or all African countries are signatory to. Also, finally, the Paris Declaration on Aid effectiveness. So these are all principles that we have brought together to make sure that they are brought to bear in the partnerships that Africa engages with its partners. Next, please. And now I just want to highlight some of those principles. With regards to AUC, you see that the principle of sovereign equality and independence is key. Respect for borders, participation of African people, non-interference, self-reliance, gender equality, social justice, and I will highlight some of this later. Similarly, you do have the NEPAD principles of good governance, African ownership and leadership. Ownership and leadership is coming again. Broad and deep participation of all sectors of the society. Here is the whole issue of inclusiveness, anchoring development of Africa's resources and resourcefulness of Africa's people. Why am I mentioning all of this? Because when we go down the line, we have to interrogate to what extent the partnership that Africa is engaging in takes into consideration all these principles of accelerating regional and continental integration. If you look at South-South cooperation, the principles are also similar. Respect for national sovereignty, national ownership and independence, to what extent Africa owns the partnership that we are engaging in. Mutual benefit, which is you will find in all partnership documents that African countries and organizations are engaged in, to what extent African is benefiting from this partnership. And the whole essence of this common position is to optimize Africa's benefits from partnerships that it engages in. And the Paris Declaration is also similar. The concept of ownership, alignment with national development, harmonization among partners, and so on and so forth. But most importantly, also emphasizing mutual accountability. Next, please. Now, what are the issues that you face when you try to have a common African strategy, bearing in mind that we do have 54 or so, 55 if you look at the African Union context, countries at different stages of development, countries that are varied. How do you now come to have a common strategy? What are the issues that you would face, and how do we address these issues in the strategic document? First of all, the scope of the partnership that we are talking about is partnerships for regional infrastructure development. So these are not bilateral partnerships between African countries and some development partners. We're talking about partnerships that entail regional infrastructure development, partnerships at the level of the African Union, such as FOCAC, or such as the EU-Africa partnerships, or such as TICAD, partnerships of that nature. Now, most of these partnerships have areas of focus. It could be improving the regulatory environment for infrastructure development to crowd in private sector investment. It could be infrastructure development and project preparation. With this, we saw that in the preparation of PIDA PAP2, where a lot of our partners, GIZ, EU, and so on, supported the preparation of PIDA PAP2 program. It could be investment. Some partners are basically interested in investing in Africa's infrastructure. So that is the scope of the partnership we are talking about. But what are the key issues? How do you deal with the situation where we already have existing partnerships and now we are coming with a common African position? What does that mean for existing partnership. We don't think this is a big problem because this common position is part and parcel of PIDA PAP2. So what we're saying is any partner that engages Africa on PIDA PAP2, this document would be valid. The document would actually also be valid for partnerships that exist, because most of those partnerships talk about win-win cooperation. And what this document is doing is defining win from an African perspective. Second is, how do you align continental, regional, and national priorities? This is the problem because Africa's partners deal with the continent at different levels. They deal with the countries, they deal with regional economic communities. The partners also deal with the African Union. So how now do you have a common position when you have partnerships at all of these different levels? I think that the integrated approach that PIDA PAP2 has adopted more or less solve this problem, because PIDA PAP2 projects were submitted by REX, and of course the REX got their projects from the member states. And also there's a problem of diversity of actors. So you have China, you have EU, you have Brazil, you have India, and so on and so forth. You have projects in energy, transport, ICT. So how do you have a common position with all these different dimensions? I think the solution we came up with is to have a differentiated approach where you identify the interests of specific partners and then channel specific project towards those different partners. Also, we do have multiple platforms for engaging with our partners. We just heard Ambassador Odembo, who is working very closely with the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, the High Representative of the African Union. But we also have PC, the Presidential Infrastructure Champion Initiative. We have PIDA, we have the Steering Committee. So we have multiple platforms for engaging with partners. We do need to make sure that we speak with the same voice, irrespective of the platform that is being used. And that is where we do believe that this partnership strategy becomes handy. Also, finally, the issue of sustainability. We look at sustainability from two perspectives: the shifting priorities of African countries themselves, but also of our partners. The typical example is COVID-19. Now we have COVID-19. I mean, there's a risk that the focus that some countries had on infrastructure may shift. It may also be an opportunity for us to start thinking about building back better. But this is also where we bring in private sector. We look at sustainability from the perspective of involving Africa's private sector, but also the academia. We do know that we have expertise in various African countries which could be used to implement projects on the continent. But also the private sector in terms of negotiations. I do remember when Africa EU had a task force. On the EU side, you had the private sector, where it was the association of the contractor. But those of us in the African side, we didn't really have the African private sector to contribute to those discussions. Next, please. Yes. Now, I think this is the last but one slide. One of the innovative aspects of this common African strategy is the accountability framework that we have developed. And this is a framework where we can assess the performance of partnerships that Africa enters into. We spend a lot of time, resources, and political capital, actually, to engage in this partnership. And so to what extent can we really say that the partnerships are achieving their objectives or not? And so we come up with a framework which actually has four pillars. The first pillar is the dimension, or actually these are the goals that we need to achieve when we enter into regional infrastructure partnership. One is regional integration. Two is inclusiveness and sustainability. Three is economic and financial impact. And four is the quality of infrastructure. These are the objectives that we need to achieve when we enter into partnership. And this framework is a framework to measure the extent to which these objectives are achieved. And the good news is that this is derived from the PIDA PAP2 project preparatory criteria. And I see that the rapporteur is putting a camera. I'm not sure whether I'm not doing very well with time, but I'm wrapping up. Now, I said there were four pillars. The first pillar is the dimension or the goals, which I've just mentioned. But for each dimension, you have criteria. For each criteria, you have indicator. And for each indicator, you have key performance indicators. I just use one of the objectives dimensions to illustrate. And here is the economic and financial impact. You could look at it in this term. We're moving from abstract, which is the dimension and goal, to more tangible things that you could measure. And this is how we want to measure the effectiveness of partnership. And I will just run through a few of the KPIs because that's what is key. And so if you want to measure how useful a partnership has been for Africa, you could look at these KPIs, for instance, the level of cross-sectoral energy integration infrastructure projects that this partnership has led to. For instance, is it just transport or energy, or has this partnership led to the development of transport, energy, ICT in an integrated manner? The percentage of productive employment that has resulted from this partnership. For instance, the number of local employment generated, the level of youth and gender. So those are just examples. In a nutshell, we have come up with a framework which we can use at the end of the day to measure how effective or not our partnerships are. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide, and is basically how do we implement the accountability framework. The document is available, is a very rich document. I cannot do justice to it within this very short period of time, but these are some of the highlights of how to implement the strategy. One is to develop strategic partnership task force. So if Africa is going to engage in any partnership, it is important that we have a task force which is made up basically of the key actors: ADB, African Union, AUDA, NEPA, ECA, and the rest, which will advise African Union on the content of this partnership. Essentially, it would be to make sure that the PIDA projects are highlighted. And there's a need for coordinating engagement with strategic partners and in pursuing a differentiated partnership approach. I will just end with that differentiated partnership approach issue. The importance here is to identify the interest of our partners. Not all our partners have the same interest. Some of our partners are interested in developing in governance issues, for instance. Make sure that we do feasibility studies and so on. Some are interested in energy, some are interested in ICT. And so we need to do a mapping of our partners. We do need to have evidence-based engagement with our partners. And this is where the VPIC that Tawela mentioned becomes very important, as it shows the status of different projects on the continent. Now, monitoring and evaluation is also very key, and the accountability framework provides a tool for monitoring and evaluating our partnership. We are suggesting that in 2025, which is the midterm of PIDA PAP2, we should do an evaluation using the accountability framework, and in 2030, we should do a final evaluation as well. So, moderator, I will stop there and thank you for your patience with me.
You said that was the shortened version, Robert. But look, I understand, and my heart goes out, especially to people like yourselves in these positions where you're trying to knit together this entire tapestry of understanding. So I get it. Thank you very much for that presentation. We are up against it. We have about half an hour left for the session, so we are going to try and move as quickly as we can through our guest presentations as well. And I'm really looking forward to them. Hopefully, we have time to have a conversation at the end. I want to hand it over to Mike Salau, who is Division Manager for Infrastructure and Partnerships at the African Development Bank. And Mike, it is a pleasure to welcome you to take the virtual microphone, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to Robert for inviting me on this panel, and also opportunity to thank AUDA, NEPAD, and African Union, and all the other colleagues present on this, and also, by the way, for organizing the PIDA Week. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and thanks to the moderator as well. I think what Robert presented now a few minutes ago, a few seconds ago, is actually a very important framework, which we believe will help Africa to catalyze partnership in a very strategic way to address the massive infrastructure need, which at the bank we evaluated between 130 to 170 billion dollars per year. That's pre-COVID, so you can imagine what post-COVID would look like, and also in view of a growth in the African population. And the second aspect is that partnership is at the center of what we do, particularly at the African Development Bank. We believe that in facing such a huge, massive need on infrastructure, there's no single institution that can actually post to be able to meet the gap, or there's no way countries themselves on their own will be able to meet this gap. Looking at the financing need, which again the bank estimated to be around 53 to 93 billion a year as a result. So this is where we are coming from, and that's why we put a partnership at the heart of what we do. So what are we doing in the African Development Bank in this framework? The bank is an infrastructure bank. That's one of our franchise that we have. So as such, we have been able to mobilize funding from our own self, and also through the partnership. The bank on an annual basis finance about 8 billion or so infrastructure, of which 50% of that financing is for infrastructure. So it's a massive investment in infrastructure from the bank side. And how do we do this? We realize that we need to operate in a global setting by building global partnership. So for the PIDA, to be specific on the PIDA program and the NEPAD agenda, the bank has put in place a few partnerships, which has been very helpful and serving us very well. One of them, at a very global high level, was the Infrastructure Consortium for Africa, which is ICA, which then some of you on this call will recall was an initiative by the G8 country when we collectively African side went to see the partners, the G8 partners, back in 2004 and so on. I think four, to see how can partners on the other side help us to do this, to implement the NEPAD program. So we started with what we call a project preparation facility, because we had a list of projects where we needed to mobilize partners to prepare. That's what Robert was referring to as a kind of midstream activities. So there, the G8, together with the bank and the African side, agreed to set up what we call the NEPAD Infrastructure Project Preparation Facility, which is NEPAD IPPF, hosted by the African Development Bank, and then seed fund then by the Canadian Development Agency and the bank, and then since then has been broadened to include other partners. So there we brought in the UK, the Denmark, Spain, Germany, which is now the lead financier, and we also brought in Norway, also came in support, including the African Development Bank itself, which is also providing funding for it. So this is one level of partnership that the bank has put in place to support PIDA project and support the preparation of PIDA project, and also the infrastructure program of the NEPAD as a whole. The second level of partnership that we put in place at the bank in the same vein, 2 years later, then we said, okay, now that we're more or less addressing the project preparation gap by setting up this facility, now we need to think about downstream financing. And that led the UK Prime Minister, then I think Tony Blair, on this Africa Commission, to really think about ways of putting partnership together between the developed countries and then Africa, to see how do we harness this partnership to massively, direct investment to Africa infrastructure. So that initiative of the Blair Commission for Africa came up with the so-called Infrastructure Consortium for Africa, which is ICA, where the African Union then and the NEPA, the Secretariat then, mobilized the REX and then the African Development Bank and UNECA to really go and discuss this partnership. And that came up to bear in 25 Glenago Summit on G8, where they formally set up ICA, hosted in the African Development Bank, which objective or mission is to help advocates for scaling up investment into infrastructure. And today, the membership of ICA has actually increased over the last 2 years with new MDBs joining, Islamic Development Bank and West African Development Bank, Afrexim Bank, African Finance Corporation. And we also now have African Union itself, the UNECA and Outer NEPA also joining as members. And that provides a platform for really harnessing partnership in a big fashion because of the diversity of the partnership. You have the G8, G20 country on one side, you have MDBs, DFI, and the African policy institutions. And then you have the practitioners on the ground with private sector, building those infrastructure. So for us, partnership is something that should be comprehensive, that should really take ground on concrete programming, and also that should have a clear target and roadmap to be implemented. So that's why we engage on this framework to promote even a bigger one that will make us to widen up this partnership. And now the framework that Robert just presented is actually the one that we fully subscribe to, and we believe will help us to fast track PIDA. And mind you, PIDA Part 2 is almost 40% more in terms of investment, investment in billions, 40% more than PIDA Part 1. So that alone, requires a strong and win-win partnership, a partnership that is practical. I have to insist on this, practical, that will help us to move forward projects and that will help us to achieve the goal that we set for ourselves. So partnership for PIDA Part 2 is going to be very important. And that, again, one of the preconditions for successful partnership is that it starts with the countries themselves. At the end of the day, it's African countries, which we show, by the way, in the ICA Financing Trend Report, to be #1 source for their own infrastructure. So they should be on the driving seat when it comes to partnership. We cannot, overlook that. So countries themselves are the first partners of their own infrastructure. So they have to start from them, and from them we can now extrapolate and build around that. Because at the end of the day, implementation, partnership will need implementation. And if you don't involve the actual implementers or decision makers at the countries, then the partnership will have difficulty in actually working. Because our role as institutional organization or international organization is to facilitate that partnership and make sure that it happens on the ground. So that's where we are coming from. So I'm very happy to be here and then, share other initiatives. But again, I also heard Robert mention the PICI initiative, which is very important for us to leverage and scale up financing, partnership of financing infrastructure. And I'm sure when Towola will speak, she'll talk about CBN and other, platforms that we have that will also promote further investment. Because at the end of the day, partnership that we are looking for is first and foremost to scale up financing in Africa, bringing knowledge to to support African infrastructure development, and help us to move to that level where we want to be in terms of modern infrastructure. So I'll stop here and willing to come back again for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate your submissions there. I know we're going to have some targeted questions for the African Development Bank as well. Let's move straight along. And Dr. Wang Jianming is the Deputy Director of GEICO Africa Office, will be replaced on our program by Dr. Kai Su, who is a Senior Manager at GEICO in Addis Ababa. So Dr. Kai Su, it's over to you.
Thank you, moderator. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Just tilt your monitor down because we're seeing only half of you.
Okay.
Much better. Perfect. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Kai from Global Energy Interconnection Development and Cooperation Organization, aka GEDCO. Yes. I think can I share my screen with our participants?
All right. I'm sure our organizers will hand you control rights so that you can play your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I will start. I think in recent years, China cooperated with many African countries on infrastructure. And according to the statistics released by the AFDB, I think over 15 billion US dollars has been invested annually. The Import and Export Bank of China, National Development Bank of China, and the China Africa Funds has done much about this. As an NGO based in Beijing, we also want to make efforts on African infrastructure development with all friends and partners. However, everybody knows Africa needs industrialization and the power is the key. So, but the problem is, at this time, we cannot get enough money. Yes, so I would like to introduce our solutions to this problem. Let's build Africa energy interconnection and adopt co-development of electricity mining, metallurgy, manufacturing, and trade. And I think this could be done by following steps. At first, we need to developing clean energy over the Africa continental and build interconnected grid to supply this electricity to all the countries needed and improve the electrification and try to get enough people and move them and move everything forward to get enough money. So I think here we have a brief picture about the planning from the GEDCO. In our planning, I think we think that we can coordinate resource and power demand in Africa. Southern Africa and West Africa will become the main load centers. Central and North Africa will become the main power bases through large-scale hydropower and solar power exploitation. East Africa will meet power demand through hydropower exploitation and will also become a load center in the long term. Then the questions come here again. You have planned a lot, but how to build this energy interconnection? Yes, frankly speaking, that is how to get money. Uh, First, I think we need to exploit the regional resource advantage and provide sufficient electricity, taking metallurgical industry as a leading force to drive whole industry chain, include manufacturing. At that time, we can sell products to buyers all over the world, and the international trade will reward with money. This is an interlocking development circle. Please look at this picture on the right, on the right of your screen, and I think you can understand what I'm talking about. And then the questions becomes, where can we get these resources and how to develop the metallurgical industry? Yes, based on planning on the continental level, we would like to see first, we would like to prioritizing metallurgical industry and building industrial parks all over the continental, just based on the resource, just based on the resource and the capacity of the region. Let's take the West Africa as an example. I think we can establish demonstration zones in Gulf of Guinea. Here we got a lot of mines, and also we can develop a lot of metallurgical industry, as well as near the Niger River economic belt. So if we accomplish this industry train, and it will surely increase the investment, because everybody see the money from this industry, and everybody would like to bring money to Africa continent. So that's the comprehensive benefits we can get it. I think by the year 2050, it will be at least 2.9 trillion US dollars will come to Africa continental, and we will make the electrification rates at 90% all over the continental at that time, and also provide at least 100 million jobs. And also we can get enough benefits from the co-development model by reducing the air pollution and reserve the land and the water resources, and other like a political trust, because everybody have the money, and they will spend their time on working, and we will have a peaceful development.
Yeah. Dr. Kaisu, if I could maybe just interject on that note, and thank you very much for what I think is a comprehensive presentation on the opportunities that exist and how GuideCo can be a driver in that. Maybe just a word on the partnerships, in mainstreaming the partnership between entities like GuideCo and PIDA in really elevating and accomplishing the objectives that PIDA has set out. Maybe just a quick word on that.
Okay, yes, as I have stated at the beginning, GuideCo is a kind of non-government organization, and we cannot interfere with Chinese government about what they will do on Africa continental. But as we're based in Beijing, and we have enough resources, and we have enough people to do something for African countries, and as well as the PIDA programs, like introduce these programs to Chinese government and introduce these programs to lots of members. These members, they have financial institutes, and they have construction companies, and as well as lots of equipment manufacturers. And I think that this will be the GuideCo's role. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kai-Su. I'm very aware of our clock. It's galloping along. So Paolo Ciccarelli is head of DevCo Unit 5, Cities, Local Authorities, Digitalization, Infrastructure. And I welcome you to take the microphone and share with us your perspective as we try and get closer to this idea of mainstreaming PIDA in these strategic infrastructure partnerships. Mr. Ciccarelli, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I understand I have very little time left, so I was just to point out a few important remarks. First of all, our Directorate General is from the 18th of January, is called now Directorate General for International Partnership. So you see very well that this change in name indicates our willingness to build partnership, and we will be very happy to enter in one of these partnership with PIDA. We are, I think I can say that we are a reliable partner, long-standing partner. We have been following all the process of PIDA. And also, I want to highlight that in the last year, we spent at least 1 billion of grants in infrastructure in Africa, which is let's say, leverage with the loans from public and private sectors. And this gives, let's say, an idea of at least 10 billions of investment every year in Africa, between our grants and the loan that we can leverage. So concerning the priorities of what we are going to work, because on the 1st of January, we started a new financial framework that will go from 2021 to 2027. And within this financial framework, we would like to follow up on the dossier on connectivity, which has been, let's say, put forward by the G20. And under this connectivity is a very specific modality in which we can engage in transport, digitalization, energy. And we are following very closely the debate on this. I am very happy that my friend, Mr. Lisinge mentioned the quality infrastructure principle, because in this connectivity, I think that these principles are very important. And when we talk about transport, of course, we are referring to boosting a multimodal corridor development in which the national and regional dimension have to be integrated. We need to make the right links to cities and to cities and to corridors, addressing also the urban-rural divide, working on ports, airports, transport corridors. So this will be something that will come in this, let's say, new reinvigorate framework with connectivity. But the same will be also for digitalization. Digitalization is now one of the priorities of the European Union. And we are looking at digitalization not only from the point of view of these big broadband connections, but we want to also to ensure connectivity which is countrywide. So reducing the digital divide, not getting only digitalization for few, but opening this, let's say, to reach out to the rural and landlocked areas, which are really key instruments to bridge the digital divide and reduce inequalities. Also, inequalities was something mentioned by Mr. Lisinge. When we come to energy priorities, I think that our focus will be certainly on renewable sources. We will work strongly on this. As you know, one of our other priorities for the Commission is the environment, the digital and the Green Deal. Are two of the, together with jobs and creation, are three very important priorities, and we are looking at accompanying Africa on the process through our action in developing a continental transmission master plan. This will be in full cooperation with the regional power pools, and the work is already started, and the European Union is very happy to support this process. So when we come to how this strategy will be, let's say, put together with the PIDA ambitions, I would say that for us, there are a few things that are important. First of all, the one that I mentioned, building partnerships. And of course, we have launched the 2020 Comprehensive Strategy for Africa. This is based on partnership, not to mention the Cotonou Agreement that has been just finalized. And we want to make this work as looking at the pivotal role of infrastructure in the operationalization of the Africa Free Trade Agreements. This is very important because infrastructure are not a self-standing issue, but is something that has to do with trade and with the provision of services. So, and we would like to put this in as I said before, in connection with the EU policy priorities, the European Green Deal, the circular economy, the smart and sustainable transport, the fair digitalization. And then let me say that, as I said, we want to put together national and regional dimension, also with the global one, of course, and the multilateralism. But we are preparing for the new financial framework 2021-2027 some flagship project that will be branded Team Europe Initiative, in which we are looking for close coordination and collaboration between the EU and our partner countries, and giving a very big role to the private sector. And then, as let's say, very last point, I want to say that the EU will offer very strong innovative financing instruments. We are working more and more on blending projects for investment. We are looking at financial guarantees in order to attract the private sector. And we also offer EU technical assistance to develop sector policy, a high quality dialogue, climate compatible investment projects that respond to the notion on transformative needs. So for us, what is important is the policy first and geographization. These are two issues that I will want to conclude my intervention with this. Policy first means that we have to invest in infrastructure, but this has to be accompanied by a very strong policy work, because it's not only a question of spending money, but it's also how to spend the money and for which objectives. And then the second is the geographization. That means that we have to really to work also take into consideration the needs at local level and national level, and put together quality and quantities, which have to go always together. I think that I will close here. I'm sorry I've been very short, but I see that the time is not really on our side. Thank you very much.
To Paolo and to all of our speakers, thank you very much. I know it was, it is a hard task to distill a lot of information, a lot of important and relevant things that we need to know about in terms of really boosting and amplifying these partnerships. So I applaud you all for the work that you've done in trying to put it down in bite-sized pieces. I want to just let all our participants know that these presentations will be available on the AU-PIDA website, au-pida.org website, and you can have a look at them at in your own spare time. There's a lot of information, I think, that you would love to have sight of. I'm going to give the closing words to Dr. Tawela Nirenda Jere, who is with Ouda NEPAC. She's the Principal Program Officer for Economic Integration. Dr. Nirenda Jere, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Iman. And it has indeed been interesting just listening to the presentation of the strategy, as well as the inputs from the various partners and collaborators. I think from my side, maybe just by way of offering some input, and as we're moving towards the end of the session, is really just to emphasize the fact that the attainment of PIDA PAP2 objectives and the build out of that infrastructure really depends on partnering and partnerships. And we recognize that these partnerships will exist at different levels, and that they will exist within different parameters. However, having a framework that allows us to then contain the way in which we engage is important, so that there is understanding across the board in terms of the way in which we engage and the way in which we collaborate, so that there is some mutuality, but also some efficiency in the way that we use the resources available. So we very much welcome this partnership strategy, which, as our director has already mentioned, together with the implementation strategy and the financing strategy being developed by the FDB, really form the core of how we will approach PIDA implementation going forward. I think it's also important to mention that coming out of PIDA PAP1, we have enjoyed partnerships with a lot of different stakeholders and partners. Some of those are the ones that you have heard speaking today. So the likes of UNECA, AFDB, the EU, GIZ, DBSA, JICA, and the list is endless. But I think what is important is that in all these partnerships, there is an element of coordinating and transparency in terms of understanding what are the shared objectives that we have insofar as building out Africa's infrastructure. I think it's also important that as we move forward, that we are able to find ways in which we can leverage the synergies and the complementarities between the different partnerships. On our side, we have always taken a view as much as possible of bringing in our partners into our planning processes, so that there is that understanding of how each partner's contributions are working together in terms of what we are trying to achieve, and that we are able to very quickly identify where synergies exist, where gaps might exist, and perhaps where more resources might need to be directed. So from my side, really just to thank UNECA for leading us in terms of developing the strategy, and to thank the various partners and the contributors to this session, and to really say that we are looking forward to seeing all these different pieces coming together as we start the implementation of PIDA PAP2. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. T, as she is affectionately known by colleagues and friends. That brings us to the end of the session today. I want to just thank all our participants for staying with us until the end. To each of our contributors, our panelists, thank you very much for putting high levels of insight and detail into what you're sharing with us, and we can enjoy the benefit of that research, as well as I said earlier, on the aupida.org website. I would love to wish everyone a fantastic afternoon and evening. Have some time to rest and recuperate. I'm back tomorrow, but some of the sessions continue today. Do stay with us. Thank you so much, and go well.
Thank you. Thank you to all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Tawela.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paulo. Good to see you.
Hello, thank you. Sorry, thank you. I couldn't put my micro.
No, thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for your contribution, and we'll keep in touch.
Yes, of course. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.